I'm Kathy Essig. This is Debbie Rosen. We have a center in McLean, Virginia called the StudyPro, and we only work in executive function. We came about it very differently. I'm a practitioner. I was a psycho-ed tester for a lot of years, a learning specialist working specifically in ADHD and executive function. I was working in executive function before I knew it was executive function, because there were many of us working with ADHD kids who said, wait a second, there's a subset to this set, and they don't all look alike. You know, it was one of those things is not like the other, and we didn't know what that meant. Debbie comes at it as a parent. We came together through her son, who we both know very well. And love very much. But
we kind of come on.
Yeah, when I went into private practice, he was my second child. And so one day Debbie said to me, it's very, very lonely sitting in the parking lot. Why do you have 10-minute breaks? And we do it for, obviously, HIPAA, that, you know, we keep everything as discreet as possible. But I never thought of a parent saying, it's really lonely and I'd like to know there's someone else who also walks in my shoes. So a lot of what we do at StudyPro is directed to parents, as well as all of the work we do with kids.
Thanks, Kathy. As Kathy had said, we did come together with her really being part of what I like to say is my son's Verizon network. He had probably everyone in the alphabet that has been helping him. He's 18 years old now and is a senior in high school. I also have a 10-year-old who's in 4th grade and has mastered the process of learning in some ways that he has not yet, but it's really fascinating, and hopefully we'll take you through that journey. One of the things that I think is really critical to start off this presentation is really to drive the distinction between what is process and what's content. So an example is that while my son is very gifted in math, and he seems to really excel at languages and pick them up very easily, the challenge he had with AP math, whatever level it was, is that every night he had to come home. And the emphasis is on every night he had to come home, and every night he had to do the work for that advanced calculus, because the next day there was work in the class that was dependent on him having done that homework. And he really struggled with that level of consistency. And it's the same type of thing with foreign language. And when it even came to the AP test for math, he really struggled, because while he was with a tutor, he spoke language as though, he spoke the math as though it was a second language. But when it came to doing the work in between that he needed to do in order to pass that AP exam, he just floundered. And so when we talk about executive function, which we'll of course do throughout the evening, it's probably the most important and fundamental concept is that the content of the math, of the history, of the English is really what we're rushing kids to competency, but the process really becomes that much more significant as you move forward, and your grade and significant in your grades, in being able to manage and organize and note take and all of the things you need to do, and to be able to prioritize work from this long-term history project you have and this English paper that's due, and to be able to make a study guide for that next science test. And process really can only take you so far, because there are very, very bright kids, in fact, some of the brightest kids that may be very intellectually savvy and capable, but can't manage the rigor of the work that they have to do. And as we move on in life, it becomes even more critical for us to be able to manage process. So how many of you have known someone in your workplace, an accountant, a lawyer, a computer scientist, and they're brilliant, and then they get promoted to management? Not so brilliant. Because the content they were brilliant at, they may not have needed a tutor for, or maybe they did to learn that, but when they went to management, it's a very different skill, and that parallel really is the same. And so we as parents, and coming from the parent side, I will say, some of what we learn in this journey, and I've learned in this journey over this last 18 years, is that we have to change our expectations as much. We have as much to learn as parents as the kids do about the process. We have as much to learn about the journey of executive function and to love those children that are in front of us, and that we can help by lowering the stakes. And so these are some of the key points we hope that you take from our presentation this evening.
So the interesting piece of this all is that we know executive functions fall into an umbrella term. We also know we are now in the DSM-5, the manual that allows us to diagnose disorders. In this version, which just came out recently, they do not specifically label executive function. It is a subset of ADD still, despite everything we know in neuroscience now. What we do know is these are the cognitive processes that are a part of executive function. What we don't have, which is unfortunate for all of us wanting to bring light to the fact that this is a rather pervasive and interesting place educationally, because we know that these children, all children, have times where they, if this is in fact developmental, which we've proven, where they are going to come into some difficulty with some areas of these skills. What we don't know is that every psychologist, every doctor, every teacher has a common vocabulary. There are variations on the definition because there isn't a set definition of it that's been put out by the American Psychological Association. So we look at inhibition, shift, emotional control, initiation, working memory, planning, organization, material organization, and self-monitoring as the elements. When we look at them, we also look at the fact that this is time-lapse photography. The executive functions are found in the frontal lobe of your brain, in the prefrontal cortex. Brain development begins in the brainstem and moves forward throughout childhood and adolescence. If you look at the blue, those are executive functions. And the development of executive function, while it starts in infancy, actually begins to move into its adult maturation at about 14. If you think of what schools are doing today with moving curriculum, that may not line up when a 12-year-old is taking a course we took somewhere midway in high school. The bigger piece of it is we now know that it's not an exact figure. Everybody is individual in their development, but the bigger piece is girls tend to develop full skills by about 20. Boys tend to develop full skills by about 30. Then, if anybody has ADHD, subtract 4 years, approximately. So you could have a child who you know intellectually they are gifted, but if they're a male and if they have ADHD, start subtracting, because what they produce is not going to match their intellectual ability for a while. And it's a not yet continuum, because they will get there, but we support them until they do get there.
And so as Kathy said, through technology, through the updated curriculum in the American school system, there really is this mismatch between the level of rigor and the content and the level of the ability of the students to be able to manage that rigor. And it's really outstripped that ability of kids to be able to manage that. And so in many cases, we really have to externalize the teaching of some of that. And that's the problem that we're really addressing here, is how do you do that? I would also say that, as she said, it is a continuum, and just like skills with content, we have a lot of patience with our kids. We don't expect them to learn math overnight. And this is a process where just because we're teaching some of these skills doesn't mean that they are going to learn them overnight. It may take quite a while, and we'll kind of walk you through the very specific skills and how that would work.
And in looking at all of this, somewhere, often middle school, if your children have already been in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, sometimes in other places, we're also finding college is a new place where this imbalance shows up far too often. We say they have amazing intellectual ability, but the scale is tipped, and too much of the mental control and self-regulation is being asked that they do not yet have. Unfortunately, that tipped scale leads to grades that don't reflect students' potential, except there's nowhere on a transcript to say, not yet. And so the C, D, or F remains the C, D, and F. And you often will look at yourself and say, they knew more than anybody else in that history unit, and yet. And we don't have a place for that. And so instead of constantly, parents will come to me and say, why isn't school changing? Why isn't the scope and sequence of curriculum being altered if we know all of this? Things are happening little by little. Schools like Lab have been leading the charge forever. But to take a huge system, say Fairfax County, we're from Virginia, it takes a lot, it's not an overnight process. And oddly, a lot of what we learned and are still learning has been happening in the last 5 years. So a lot of schools are scurrying to try to meet our new understanding of neuroscience, but it's our responsibility to lean in, and as we've said over and over, you'll hear it's the buzzword in our center, we need to externalize the skills for the children until they internalize them, because this imbalance is going to happen. It happens for some without a lot of issue. It happens for some where, tourniquets are being placed. So it's the sublime to the ridiculous, and that's just what it's going to be because it's developmental.
And so what happens when the umbrella has holes in it is really the question. Because we hear a lot of things when we get phone calls, and 3 things that we hear almost every time. My son or daughter is really smart, but somehow they're just not meeting their intellectual capability. They're smart, but they just don't seem to, as Kathy said, really, they have a mismatch of their performance. And I'm trying to help them because my executive functions are working quite well, quote unquote, but they won't listen to me. And why aren't they just learning this at school? And the truth is that we're not teaching it, as Kathy had mentioned. We're really not teaching these specific skills in school. When we were younger, when I was in school, we learned how to take notes. We had specific classes about how to take notes. We had specific classes about how to create study guides. Unless, as Kathy mentioned, unless you're in a specialized school, they're not really teaching these skills very specifically, and they're certainly not teaching them as a system that helps me as a student understand what is the best way that I learn, and then how do I take that and apply that to my study strategies.
So the walls. There are places throughout curriculum, no matter what school you're at, where there's going to be a requirement of greater independence and a requirement of greater process. There is going to be that point in 4th grade where we're going to start grading you on how you spelled it, not that you knew it, despite the fact that the question might look like, do you know? There's going to be a point in high school where I'm not going to give you the steps to a long-term research project, and you're going to get a topic and 2 weeks. There's going to be a point, oddly, people laugh at this, when you go to college and you really shouldn't have taken the 8 o'clock in the morning class because you can't get up. There's going to be a point where the process and the independence can cause kids to hit a wall in a lot of different ways. Often it's about, 60 miles an hour steadily into brick. And when that happens, they can feel really, really down, and they can question their ability. And that's where we're going to say, as parents, the largest, biggest gift you can give a child is to help them through, this has nothing to do with intellect. And that's the gift that I think parents are more and more realizing they have to give, because at school, you got the 47 because you couldn't spell anything, and you're like, but it's all accurate. And nobody says, I'm really sorry, this is how I was grading it, but I understand you know it. It's not, as teachers, it's not what we really think about unless we work with a population who has this happen over and over and over again. But the walls are what really can send a child into a tailspin.
So the question really is, what happens when it's not yet? And what do we do in the meantime when the rigor of the content is outstripping our ability to be able to manage the whole process? And that's when we introduce all of the executive functions to specific strategies. And that's what study skills are.
And that's what often people get very confused about with the term executive function and the term study skills. What's the correlation? The correlation is huge. All of this is required to be the best student you can be. You have to be able to, as an independent learner, have all of these skills. That's what educationally we believe are the subsets of success. All of these skills actually do translate into these cognitive processes. In order to be able to time manage, you have to be able to understand initiation, working memory, and self-monitoring. In order to be able to plan and prioritize, you have to be able to look at inhibition, shift, initiation, working memory, planning and organization, material organization, and self-monitoring. Every one of the skills that is deemed a study skill, that is possibly a grouping that you feel you understand the definition of more, is reliant on these skills. Children can be good in some and not good in others that meet those qualifications, and you can say, wow, they can really do it for math, they can't do it for science. The piece that really plays hard into the why is it they can do it for one and not for the other is their engagement and their feeling of self-worth, and usually how much they feel the teacher respects them. Most kids will do anything if they feel praised and validated. And you can look to the why can they and why can't they, and probably figure that out. If you think, so what do they need for this, and where is their vulnerability? So we say it's an umbrella term. Here's where it's mostly umbrellaed. While we call this an umbrella term because it's a continuum of development, it's also an umbrella when we look at it educationally and look at the match. It takes significant executive functions to master each of these categories. So all of these work in umbrellas. And in special education, we call umbrella terms those that have no clear one direction path. So if we look at those umbrellas and we look at what we can do, you may be able to do it with your child. You may not be able to do it with your child for two reasons. One, you might not feel that you have the capability to do it, or two, you and your child have gotten to a place where they feel they're emotionally letting you down, so they don't let you in. And that's very typical of teens. You are the people they want to please the most, And if I think I can't please you, I'd rather push away, and sometimes in pretty volatile ways.
And the other thing from the parent's perspective that we like to talk a lot about with these slides is that visually what we try to designate is that those are bumper lanes. So we want the kids bowling, but we want them to stay in their own lane. We want them to do the bowling on their own, but we want to give them the type of scaffolding that's helping them with the process and not the content, if that makes sense.
But if we take things like time estimation, people would say, gee, why do you have to estimate time? Time is something that, again, 14 seems to be a big point, that does not make sense to a child till about 14. When you say to your younger children, hey, we're leaving in 5 minutes, put your shoes on, and often they don't, they're not being willful. They have no clue what 5 minutes means. And they might even be considering they're going to do it, but they ran out of time because their view of 5 minutes and your view of 5 minutes are not the same. So we ask kids educationally to estimate time because they can't plan if they aren't considering the time I have available and the time I think I will need to be successful in completion. In also estimating time, we ask them to consider what we call white space. What time do you have available? If you're in 15 soccer leagues, can you get your homework done? And that's a question that parents really have to ask ourselves. Are we giving them the time they need to get their work done? If we aren't, things have to be pulled back. When we look at prioritizing work, science tells us that kids are really, really exhausted when they get home from a full day of school. And the brain is great at finding workarounds to just take a break. So the scientific workaround is all of the synapses have stopped firing if they ride a bus, if there's at least 20 minutes between their last class and when they're going to start homework. And for most private school kids, there's way more than that because they had sports in between. So in prioritizing work, we say you make a list of all of your assignments for the night. And if there's something online, you still physically make a list of all of your assignments online. And then you say, what's the easiest one in the list? Because I'm going to do it most efficiently, most effectively, feel best about myself in the least time. That gets number one, because now I'm awakening my brain. Number two becomes the hardest. It's earliest in the day. I have the best light I'm going to have, and light really does make a difference. I am most alert. And this is probably an assignment, if I can talk myself into it, I'm going to just not do, because it's hard. So easy, hard. Now, we can't stay in hyperfocus for long or we get diminishing returns. I need to go back to easy. What's my second easiest assignment? And you alternate all night. And science has proven you will work more efficiently, more effectively for higher grades if you do that. Note-taking is another example. It's asked in school for children to note-take, but it's usually not taught. And actually sitting with your child and explaining that just running notes, taking up an entire page, is visual clutter. And in order to see the standouts, it doesn't have to be a true outline, but it has to be that outline format of most important, less important, least important details. And you just have to keep running that slope so that you can see easily how you're breaking this down into the elements that you need to learn. Those are some of the skills that anybody who is trained in this works with kids on. And it's skills that they take and run with. I mean, it's really not rocket science. And many parents just logically can come up with some of these conclusions. If you're one of those parents, help your child. If you're not one of those parents, find someone who can, if homework has become a real disaster. Because that's where you're going to see the cracks first. They are going to hold it together in school, and come home and just not be able to handle. They've run out of fuel.
So, for example, my son had to write his college essay. And it's a very difficult thing. My son still struggles with planning. Although I stopped looking at his grades last year because I wanted to be able to see what he could do on his own, more on that later, he still goes to an executive function coach, because I know somebody, who helps him with planning. And planning is still something that he has some vulnerability. So when it came time to him writing his college essay, what I was able to do is help him understand and really get to what is the heart of the story. What is it, who is it you're trying to, who's your audience? What is it you're trying to communicate to them? How do you connect, the beginning and the middle and the end? But I'm not doing the work for him. I didn't write one word on that page. I think I gave him a suggestion for one word. And in the end, it was beautiful. And it was most beautiful, and I was most proud because he did it himself. My fourth grader, because some of you have younger kids, when she was in third grade, a paper came home with about 25 lines, and the end result was supposed to be a float, like they do in the Macy's Day Parade. And I can guarantee you that every third grade parent made that float, because there were some pretty awesome floats there. And I know most of those parents, and they did not make most of those kids, and they did not make those floats. And so what I tried to do is say to her, whenever you get a sheet like this, what's the first thing that you do? When you have an assignment like this, the first thing you do is you plan. You have to sit and you have to read it. Let's sit and read it. And the first thing we did is sat and read it, and then we left. And I said, okay, tomorrow we're going to come back and we're going to make our plan. But step one, no matter what, is planning. Another piece that I think is key that Kathy talked about is really about understanding what your schedule is and having the time to do the work. So really from about fourth grade on, kids should be able to have a clear understanding of what their schedule looks like and have a piece of paper that's got Monday through Friday, Sunday through Saturday, really, every day of the week, and write down, with their favorite colors, if they're younger kids, mark out, cross out, what are the times that they're going to school, what are the times that they have dance, or they have sports, or they have anything. Where's your white space? What's the time that's left? And I'll tell you, when, again, I sat down, even being in this business and holding the class, and when I sat down with my daughter, we realized that her time on certain days was really tight. And so no wonder she was coming home on Monday and kind of having fits on the floor. Because by the time she got out of school and went to dance and this and that, it was just too much. So we decided that she was going to stay in school and after school care so she could get her homework done. And we did that 3 days a week so that she actually had the time. And then we went back and sketched in, when's Wordly Wise going to happen? When's extra math going to happen? And we really helped her understand, and we do a check-in every single week. How's that schedule feeling for you? So it's starting to transfer that responsibility from the parent to the child, but it's that scaffolding, that kind of bumper lanes that we talk about.
Because the goal is learned independence. And if any of you have heard this term, we use it a lot with older children, and I use it a lot with my rebounders because I see a lot of kids who've come back from college and from phenomenal colleges and just needed a little more time to figure it out. And learned independence is when a child just gets it, when they either get it because the maturation has occurred, or they get it because they have learned the skills that they need for success. And the really phenomenal part, and I've been in a room to see it, it's electric, is when it all comes together and they figure out that they're doing it and they didn't have to think about the steps anymore. And that's like just a really beautiful moment if you have older kids that you go, oh, thank you, God. I knew that we didn't get hit by a bus. I knew they'd come back, and they do. It is developmental. Nothing is wrong in the process. But when the process shifts, it's palpable. We want the children to be at learned independence, hopefully before they go to college. But if we look at the continuum of executive functions, many people won't. Many males won't. What we need to know as parents is that we've matched where they're going and what the expectations are to what they do have, because they will have lots and lots and lots and lots of executive functions at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. But for the men in the room, my husband always says, before we even knew the term executive function. He's an engineer. So, I mean, he got the whole math science thing real early. But he said, high school was pretty easy because my teachers liked me and didn't demand a lot. He went to UVA, was horrible undergrad because they demanded everything and on time, and how dare they. And then graduate school just got easier and easier and easier. And that's what a lot of people will say about their experience. We have always had this continuum. Brain development is what it's been for a long time. Nothing has shifted in the development. What has shifted is our scope and sequence, how early we lead kids into certain skill sets that they aren't capable of yet. They're intellectually aware of, they're intellectually curious about, they might be even intellectually very informed on. But the process necessary to complete independent functions, they're not really there yet. By college, we want them there because at this point, the recent research says that 59% of the kids will take up to 6 years to graduate. Now that, time's on their side. I look back and I think, why was I wanting to get out of school at 21 to do this for the next 40 years? But if we're really saying these are 4-year structures, what have we done wrong that the final structure that they worked so hard for is maybe a 6-year or more structure?
So what does it look like to achieve learned independence? So again, we want to repeat that this is a continuum. So I mentioned earlier that in 11th grade, at the beginning of 11th grade, I decided I was going to stop looking online to see what my son's grades were. How hard was that? How hard would that be for you? Please tell me someone else that it was really hard. I see heads nodding. It was really hard for me. I'm a type A personality, and I really struggled with that. But 2 things happened. Okay, one was it was somewhat liberating for me to not be looking every day and to stop the nagging, right? Because inevitably, what are you going to do when you get the bad news? You're going to nag. And it was liberating for my son because he knew there wasn't a net. It wasn't going to be mom's going to tell me, oh yeah, remind me that this homework's done. But it was also the right time for him because I started to see that little bit of awakening that Kathy had talked about, that he was really starting to take some of these skills and be able to put them in the right kind of a place and use his skills as he should appropriately. And so, whether it's the right time for you to not look at your child's grades, you'll have to decide. But for me, it was really a win-win for both myself and for my son. And so what we're really looking for is for that child to take that transition over time to say, I am the one who's in charge of my learning success. I'm the one who is being motivated. And even if it's as motivated as they can be, my son still doesn't like to do homework. And he will do anything he possibly can to do his homework at school. And you know what? That's okay. Because in the end, he's going to be really, really successful. He's going to be just fine. But he's taking responsibility for his success. It's maybe not the way I would do it, but it's the way he would do it. And he gets, all A's and B's, which for me, with the variability that he has in his attention, I think that's great. And so what we're really trying to do is to see that, longer term view and have these kids achieve, to really invest in their longer term future, because that's what time in the learning zone really is. There's the concept of the learning zone and the concept of the performance zone. And the learning zone is where, we hope that they can make mistakes, just like the practices on the field. And we as parents have to ask ourselves, when they do come home and they made mistakes, they haven't gotten the perfect grades on the test, maybe they haven't done as well in anything as we want them to. Are we making the stakes so high because we have our own fears? Well, if they don't do really well in this test, then they're not going to get into this advanced class, or they're not going to get into this, and then they may not get into college. Well, I can promise you that even though my son, who may be kind of on, I don't know, who knows if it's extreme end of the spectrum, but he's had his challenges, he will go to college. and he will go to a college that has some learning support, because there's great colleges for everybody, and it's a highly rated college, and it has learning supports. And we have taken the really long-term view where he can have time in that learning zone, the time to develop his skills over many, many years, because he's not going to get there overnight. And the words that we use with our kids, they really, really matter, and that's where the growth mindset comes in. So how many of you are familiar with growth mindset and Carol Dweck's work? So about half of you. So Carol Dweck is a PhD psychologist out of Stanford, and she did a body of research on how kids react to failure after they were praised either for being super smart or they were praised on effort. So you're such a natural talent, you're so smart, or, boy, you really worked hard on that. And then they were given the next hardest tasks. And what they found was the people that were praised on being super smart did exceedingly worse on the next task and wouldn't take the risk of moving to that next level, of trying to, they couldn't take the risk of losing that moniker of being smart. And the people that were praised on effort was like, oh, I realize my brain can grow, and I will be willing to take that effort, that risk, and doing that next hardest puzzle. And they would make comments like, boy, I was really hoping this might be interesting. I'm really glad I came here. I thought this might be a waste of time. And these were sixth graders. And so what we have to realize is that when our kids go to school for 8 hours a day, they're being constantly thrown into this environment where they don't know certain material. They go from one class to another class to another class, some of which are not natural talents they're super smart at, quote unquote, right? Because who is super smart and naturally talented at all of these range of topics that we learn in school every day? And they're going from, in every class, from this don't know to this know. And inevitably, what happens? You get frustrated. So when you get frustrated, what do? Well, I think I need to know it right away. If I don't know it fast, I'm not smart. You see how damaging that can be, right? And so what we really want to do is we want to give them strategies. And study skills are strategies. Well, what do you do when you get frustrated? Let's learn to take a brain break. Let's learn to self-advocate. Let's learn to look at things from a different direction. Let's learn to break things down. Let's learn to go back into the book and see, what maybe have I missed? Let's ask a friend, what strategies are they using? And that's really what's key, because what we want kids to understand, and we as parents have to understand, is that smart is a journey. Okay, it's about the road to getting there. It's about, how many people want employees and colleagues that they work with that want to get it done fast and just want to get it done, like as fast as they can, and hey, it's going to be done. Or they really want to invest in getting it right, and if they have a setback or make mistakes, they're like, oh, okay, I can recover from that. And that really, a hallmark of her work is that even though it's hard and you may not get it, you just don't get it yet. And you can imagine what it feels like. My daughter is 10 years old and she doesn't ride a bike. When people say, you don't ride a bike? And I say, no, she doesn't ride a bike yet. Because it feels better for her. There's no shame involved in that. You know what, you're trying hard, you just don't get it yet. And the last story I'll tell to show you how powerful this is that my daughter has some, reading comprehension issues. She can seem to, decode just fine, has no problems reading. But one day she struggled so hard, I said, you know what, we're just going to slow down. And we're going to sit here and we're going to read sentence by sentence. And she was just writhing around, just having such a hard time. But after all that was done, I want to pull every one of my eyelashes out. I said, boy, that was really hard for you, wasn't it? I can see how hard that was for you. And her whole body language changed. She just lit right up. She's like, yeah, that was. I said, but you worked so hard, you pushed through that. We should try that again tomorrow. She's like, oh, yeah, we will. So our language with our kids and how we react to them not being there yet can have such a powerful effect on them. And that's really why growth mindset is so critical for both parents and for our kids.
And sidebar, for any of you who haven't read any of Carol Dweck's work, her most common book and the easiest read that's not highly research-based is called Mindset, and it's phenomenal. There's another professor from Johns Hopkins who has a book out. Her name is Mary Kay Ricci, R-I-C-C-I, that is Mindset for Parents, and it's also and she just released Mindset for Kids, and it proves over and over and over again, we're using it in more and more schools, her philosophy, and we know neuroplasticity, okay, the big psych word here. We know that we can grow our brain, that our brains are malleable, and that we can change focus, and we can work through things we don't know, and with resiliency and grit, we can become, if not really good at it, we can become good enough at it to be successful at some level. And success really is how I'm feeling it. We all own our success. So, how many of you have seen the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer? I'm going way back and I'm showing my age. Okay, it's about a chess player and it's based on a real individual. And his name was Joshua Waitzkin. And he's a genius. And he one day, when people were asking him about his genius, said this: very gifted people, they win and they win. And they are told that they win because they are winners. That seems like a positive thing to tell children. But ultimately, what that means is when they lose, it must make them a loser. And he talked about how we, as educators and as parents, set kids up with, you know, you really know this, I expect you to get an A. Or, see, I told you you could get an A, not look at the initiative, look at the work, aren't you proud of your success? So, as we were just mentioning, Carol Dweck says there are two mindsets. There is a growth mindset, and there's a fixed mindset. And often, well, obviously, we want children to be in a growth mindset, and we want the structure to be that they always realize that they can achieve anything with grit and with resiliency. It will be at different levels, but that they can achieve if they put their heart to it. Many times, because of something that was said, something that they felt, children can fall into a fixed mindset. We all can. We are predisposed to some point for one or the other. But when we look at nurture and nature, our interactions and how we believe we've been seen really affects this almost more than what we brought to the table in our genetic structure. Many children that we see, some of the children that we see with executive function coming to our center have either advanced their fixed mindset or developed into a fixed mindset. They don't know how to fix it. It's that thing, it's kind of like Einstein's definition of insanity, because while they desperately want different results, they keep doing the same thing over and over. I tell kids all the time, and I'm one so I can say it, teachers are smart, we're not necessarily creative. If they line two tests up side by side, often the format is exactly the same. If they didn't do well on test one and didn't change how they studied, chances are test two is going to look very similar in results. But we don't help kids understand that they can move into a learning zone and try something different unless we're specifically working with them in executive function. It's not something that's commonly brought up in school, and it's something that a lot of parents don't even think of. You know, you don't have a bag of tricks. You have the way that you were probably taught. So this is an area that can become difficult for children, but with neuroplasticity, we want them to see that they have this ability. And when they don't see that ability, overlay starts. So if we look at it just from executive function where anxiety wasn't primary, inefficiency can grow anxiety. And children who weren't anxious can become anxious. And once we start layering on, things can go a lot worse than they had previously been. Another study that came out, I guess in September, was that 1 in 3 children can potentially meet, of the children who are 14 to 20 right now, can potentially meet the DSM diagnosis of anxiety during their teen years, who did not have any awareness of that diagnosis before. So we've got a problem on our hands with the push. If we're saying we're going to send one, they're saying up, it's better than 1 in 5, possibly 1 in 3. And what all of that kind of pockets into is what we call in education the failure cycle. When children start becoming anxious, when they start pulling back, often their whole consideration is, I'd rather choose to fail than try to fail. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to look a lot better if I don't do it than if I do it and flail. If I can say to my friends, I don't care, I save face. The conundrum here is they care desperately. When we think that a child in this process doesn't care, and we use the word which I think needs to be eliminated from the English language, you are lazy. We have instilled something that's really hard to break. When people who care about them say, why are you lazy? They really kind of lose faith in themselves. So I'm saying how we choose our words can move them out of this cycle and move them into a growth mindset. And if they trust us, whomever the us is, they can move out of this, they can move on, and they can be highly successful. So if we think of the must-haves, we know, back to what I was talking about before, we know that children are going to be required to be able to make their plans, to follow through on their work, to complete what is expected of them. We also know that if executive function is a continuum, we know educationally and psychoeducationally that we have to meet them where they are. We can't ask somebody to come to a level that they aren't available for. We can't ask somebody who's weak to do push-ups. We can't ask a child who can't plan to plan a 2-week assignment and expect a good grade. So educationally, I would know, hopefully, where all of my children in the room will fall. I would say as parents, if you don't believe at this point, if you're standing back and saying, I want them to take control, I want them to have the ability to speak for themselves, I agree with you. But you need to be in the background and talking to the teacher about, so what do you see? So that you can help bolster them at home, because they really do need our support as parents more than anything else. Our emotional connection, our acceptance of where they are, our saying to them, we will get there, means so much and makes this whole process so much easier.
So as Kathy said, we know our kids the best. And she had a quote from one of the speakers that we had at the center, that you can't push your child to a level of maturity they're not ready for. That was from Dr. Rob Mapu. And as a parent, he works with Sticks Root Group, and as a parent, that really resonated for me, because I can remember many times trying to push my child to a level he was not ready for. And it never worked, by the way. I keep trying as we speak. I'm going to go home and try to get him to not sleep in the basement. We'll see how that works. And so, I always like to say that after 18 years of wilderness therapy, CBT, DBT, talk therapy, executive function, his whole Verizon network, I've learned a few things. And as to kind of round out the whole presentation, as Kathy had said, I used to say, it's frustrating because you'd go in between all of these sessions and you'd be pulling in and some other parent, maybe one of you, would be pulling out. but we would never really have a chance to talk to each other and say, you'd always feel very alone in the process. Why is it seem like I'm the only one who, my kid's really smart, but they're not necessarily meeting their potential? And so over the 18 years that we've been doing that, or that I've been doing this, and that we've been working together for the last 6 or 7, there were 7 things that I feel like I would want to share if I could with parents. And one is that we do. Yeah, here at the parking lot. One is, to meet your child where they are, and to radically accept the child that's really in front of you. Do they have the skills? Are they just missing some skills? Have we taught them? We take a lot of care in teaching our kids math at a certain level, so that first they're going to learn their addition, subtraction, then they're going to learn then they're going to learn their division and their multiplication, and on and on and on. And are we building that same process skills at the same level? And we want to make sure we're not getting our worries and panics, as we said earlier, and our concerns about them and oversizing them, lowering the stakes for these kids. When your child was first learning how to walk, do you remember what you did when they fell over for the first time? You said, oh, that's so cute, that's awesome, look at them, they stumbled and they fell. Well, where they stumble and fall now, all of a sudden, for some reason, as they get older, the stakes just seem to get so much higher that we put all that stress that we have about their stumble and fall right back on them. And so we kind of wonder if maybe we should lower the stakes a little bit and make it safer and allow them a longer period of time to learn how to organize and plan. And maybe that grade on that test really wasn't, life-altering. And as Kathy had talked about, and we talked about with growth mindset, our words can have such a profound effect. And what we go and we talk to schools all the time, and one of the schools we just talked to recently said, oh, you remember Katie, she's the one who erases all the mistakes on her test because she won't go home and tell her parents. She can't face her parents. I have someone, and my daughter tells me about someone in her school that keeps little marks for everything they get wrong all year long, which just says, making a mistake is bad. No, making a mistake is just another word for learning. How do we learn if we don't make mistakes? I don't know about you guys, right? But we all have to learn from our mistakes. And so, again, we don't want to do the work for them. It's about the process. How can we help them with the process and not the product? And we often are looked at by our kids as being perfect. We may not know this, but this was pointed out to me through all my years of co-therapy with my children. That people really do, that our kids really do look at us as, the semi-gods, the people that are, the most important and they look up to the most in their lives. My daughter just last night said, yeah, but Mom, you're perfect. No, you know what? I sure don't hope you think that. We can't just be our strengths and we can't just be our weaknesses. And so we have to often model for them, oh yeah, I made this horrible mistake today at work. You know what I did? Show them that we can make mistakes too, and that we're vulnerable, and that it's okay to make mistakes, and that it takes time to build mastery. We're just not there yet. And I'll let that one sink in. Okay, when have you gone to work, if you work, or had a really bad day, and you came home and something really bad happened, and then someone yelled at you about it? Not so great. Okay, so we just have to remember that somehow the way that we treat our kids has to be kind of that whole age-old rule of golden rule, do unto others. How do you build resilience? You build resilience by knowing that you're capable of handling situations on your own. And that means parents don't save us all the time. It means that we have to learn how to handle situations ourselves, asking our kids, instead of being the first there with the answer. How are you going to handle that? What approach are you going to take? Oh, you didn't do so well on that test. What do you think? Let's sit down and what do you think you could have done better? What approach can we take? How do we talk to your teachers, right? Helping them build those skills. And then most important, it's about loving the child that's in front of you, about knowing that your relationship trumps everything. Nothing matters more than that relationship. And at the end of the day, when I look back on those 18 years, my most important job was to help build the self-esteem for my child and not to take it away. And that's a thing that if there's anything that I would have done differently, and I don't live with a lot of regrets, it's I would have spent every moment trying to do that even more. And I think he's come to a pretty good place, so I think it's somewhat of a happy ending. Everyone knock on wood. But that's probably the most important point for us.
And I'll just say for that final piece, if any of you have children in your 20s like mine are, the path was not, ever, as I look back now, what I thought when I first looked at them when they were born. They're sort of there. When I, got the first, my daughter's the older of the two and rather perfectionistic. When I got the first call from her in college with, "Oh my God, Mom, I have a C, bring the dogs down, I can't stand this." I was like, oh, here we go. But that was her first failure. And I thought, wow, that is horrible and hard. And for her, it was horrible and hard, and it shouldn't be in college. I think I probably helped her, and her teachers helped her, because there were several assignments in high school that were, give me one more day because I don't like where it is, and people accepted that, and they don't accept it in college. So, sometimes we're doing them a disservice if they don't see it early. My son is 3 years younger than her, and his whole notion, starting in middle school with a teacher who respected him but hated him, was, why should I do your homework if I can get 100 on the test? And his first C was in 7th grade math, because he had 100 against a 0, and they didn't give him an F. And that's the piece that as parents, it's really hard for us to watch them along the way. But I work predominantly with the older high school kids and the college kids. And the first place they fail should not be the place they've been wishing to be their whole life. Because when they get to college, they're on their own. You can't do it anymore. And if they've been shored up, something's going to go wrong. And I don't see kids that go to Nova. I see kids that go to the top 5%. And it's not because I wouldn't see kids that go to Nova. I just think that if we're going to have a problem at the end, it's usually our brightest kids who everybody knew their intellectual capability and gave them an out on process. If you have kids who are older who are super bright, teachers give outs, we give outs, and then they get to college and nobody gives them that little extra time or that little extra think about it, or sure, you blew that question on the test, you can go back and do it again. Nobody does that. And we don't want the first place they fail to be the place they've been wishing for and killing themselves for their whole life. So we believe that really a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what you can do as parents with us, with somebody else, there's lots of people out there, is really looking at it as a 3-tier model. Some kids just need that foundational vocabulary and understanding to be successful with their executive functions. Some kids have real vulnerability and need someone to dig in with them. If you are not that someone for emotional purposes, find someone. But find someone who's really highly trained, because there's a lot of people out there who can hang the shingle and say, well, I'm organized, so I guess I can teach this. There's a lot of science behind it, and you're going to spend a lot of money, so spend money on the right people. And then the third group that we believe in this process is those after-school programs, or programs where they have a homework center, where the children can be guided to learned independence, but don't necessarily have to be tutored to learn independence. The word tutor is a word that we use very generally as a society, but tutors often are very content-driven, and if your child is the person who knows most about World War II but failed the test, they probably do not need a tutor. They need a learning specialist or an executive function coach, because most likely the failure was due to process. So we have to start distinguishing, both as educators, as knowledgeable parents, and as kids, what do we really need? Because there's basically 3 tiers to support, and there's 2 ways to support. And tutoring is content-driven, and coaching, as we see it, is process-driven.
So to wrap up, to wrap up in time for questions and answers, we hold as a community service a monthly lunch and learn. It's completely free. We have a lot of free things we do in our center. Every single month we bring in another specialist. If you're interested, there's a way to sign up back there online. 95% of everything we send out is for any of the free specialists, everything from tech talks to building self-esteem to no more nagging to is your child ready for college to growth mindset. We just had Mary Kay Ricci speak at our center. So we'd invite you and anyone you'd like to be part of our mailing list and also just to contact us if you want a copy of the slides. Or if you have a question for us or want to stop by, this is our contact information. It goes to both of us, and that's our center. And with that, I guess we're going to open it up for questions and answers.
So the question is audiobooks. And if we supply audiobooks to our children, have we supplied a crutch? So under ADA, the Adult Disability Act, along with under IDEA, which is for kids that are under 18, the audiobooks are listed in both as a resource and an accommodation that can be given. And so children can use them straight through law school, medical school, into their adult life. For anybody who has in their testing a differentiation in their reading and then their comprehension, there is a federally funded program called Learning Ally that once you become a member, it's a really small fee to become a member. It used to be free, but now it's, what is it? $99, one-time fee. Learning Ally, A-L-L-Y. Many schools have a subscription to it, but if you join personally while you're in school and the testing is current, because often when you get to college, they aren't going to ask for retesting because they assume if the last test for abilities was a WACE, an adult scale, there's not going to be any change to that unless there's been a concussion or a traumatic brain injury. I mean, it's for the negative that it changes, or drug involvement. So if you join Learning Ally at this point, you fill out the parent side. You can go on tonight. You can go on tonight and look at it. And then the learning specialist at your school has to sign off saying, we have testing that matches what they're asking for. At that point, anything that you need, whether or not they have it, will either be made for you or they pull it out of their library. Your kid will get the download in, I think, 72 hours if they don't have it. Otherwise, it's 24 to 48 hours. So of the language issues, anybody who has any of that processing that slows down comprehension, any of the automaticity, I'm going to take up way too much time if I deal with this totally, but I can talk to you later. Anybody who has that, having it come in multimodality will cause them to be able to keep the reading rate at the average pace. And for a child who is a slower reading and has issues with comprehension, it's like putting your car in stall and trying to go down the street. Your brain processes at a certain point, and if things are happening too slowly, they're only processing pockets, not the entirety. So they'll be like, I swear, I read it. And you know they read it because they have pockets of information, and then you think, but that was a huge piece. How did you miss that? They missed it because the processing is variable. And if I hear it and I see it, hearing it forces my eyes to track appropriately, and in tracking appropriately, I will take it all in. For students who are dealing with some of the comprehension issues, they experience that pocketing that I'm talking about. They experience sitting there, staring at a page, trying to be really focused and have intent to complete it. And your brains just don't allow you to move forward. But if you're getting it multimodality, your brain has no choice but to move forward. There's a study out of Stanford that takes it one step further. And if you have anxiety, get on a treadmill. They did a test with kids looking at, it was a fabulous study, and I have kids, my kids are like, oh my God, here she goes, we're walk, talk, learning again, and that's what I call it. If you listen to it and read it while you're moving, they put kids on recumbent bikes and treadmills. The working memory picks up. They had a 10 to 20 point gain in tests. So for a 10-year-old with executive dysfunction, is coaching appropriate? The coaching shifts if the children are younger. It's 6th grade when we first require, if we look at American scope and sequence, not an individual school, just holistically. It's 6th grade when things first start becoming independent to the point that that's wall number 1 for most people. And so we have said, so as not to have a child lose self-esteem, you should actually not start the what's wrong with me coaching until those walls are hit in the school. However, we believe that introducing growth mindset and introducing skills that you will be looking for in the kind of, strap in, here comes 6th grade, is essential for the child that's showing some vulnerability. Not a parent, and I'm not saying this is you, not a parent saying, we actually deter parents from taking it if they're just like, if they name a college, I'm like, they're not ready. But if they say, this is happening at school, they're coming home crying, they're not feeling good about themselves, I think the vulnerability is kicking in. You work at it differently. You come at it from a growth mindset, and you teach them growth mindset, and then you teach them the skills that are just developmental and already happening for them in a little more depth, but all through the growth mindset vocabulary.
Quick question, do you recommend gap year for kids who?
Yes. Do I recommend gap year? I love gap year. The rush to what are we doing? If you don't, gap year for college. If you don't know what you're doing, I often, for parents that I've worked with for a long time, Debbie knows I say this, it's horrible, but I'll be like, man, give me the $40,000, I could use it, I'm a teacher. You are going to burn the money, they are going to burn a lot of self-esteem, and they're probably either going to be asked to come back or choose to come back if they're seriously not ready. Gap years are amazing, but not gap years in your basement playing games. And oddly, a lot of people say they're not ready and just let them stay home and play games. They have to find something that's going to find that passion, that interest, and that ability to say, I'm capable of taking care of myself. A gap year is a perfect way to have a child understand how to take care of themselves, how to manage financially. Usually they have to have some sort of a checking account thing, how to find passion. I think there are unbelievable programs. And you don't have to find the $50,000, $60,000 ones that are out there. But just finding something that gives them mission and purpose and drive. And it can be really, really inexpensive to really, really expensive. That's up to you. But it all meets the same needs.
Just so you know, also, there's a program here locally called Broad Futures that actually works with kids that have diagnoses and helps them get an internship locally. There's also another program called Dynamy that also is an internship-based program that's in Worcester, Mass., because those were two things we were looking at for my son because, he's had enough trips to Fiji to help save the turtles. Not that we don't love turtles, but really wanting to give him mission and purpose is some alternative as we're still making this decision about college. Worcester is called Dynamy. Okay, I always do this wrong. It's something like D-Y-N-A-M-E or D-Y-N-A-M-Y.
I think it's A-M-E.
Dynamy, and that's in Worcester, but it's pronounced, it's actually Worcester, but it's pronounced Worcester. Yeah, okay. So right there. It's right near Clark College, yeah. And there's also a gap year fair that if you go online, there's a gap year fair, and they come here every year with a number of gap year alternatives. Yes, question.
So it's the chicken and the egg, and one's a subset of the larger set, so it's both. I mean, and so what we look at is, as a family unit, really contracting with, these are the behaviors that I would appreciate, and doing some sort of a reward policy for what he's doing. But I say to families regularly, particularly a male, you said, right? Okay. The boys are so, okay, so a 10-year-old with ADHD, and what do you do, and how do you tease out what's executive function and what's ADHD if the testing alludes to both? What you need to know is, a lot of times for home life, it's one and the same. And having a contract where they know, where they're not blindsided, here's our expectations in the house, here's how I want to help you, here's where I'm going to give you the ability to tell me you don't want me to help you, at which point we have to find someone who can help you. And here's the big one. Here's how we are going to handle games and phones before I ever buy them for you. It is incredibly hard. Boys are so visually adept, way more so. Their visual processing is so much more advanced than girls through that 10 to kind of 15-year-old age. And if you unleash the beast and then try to go backwards, it's hell. So you need to make sure that you contract with expectations. Don't let them go to bed if it's something you can handle because it hasn't yet happened. Don't let them go to bed with any electronic devices. Circadian rhythms have been proven to be a huge part of what will exacerbate ADHD and executive function. And so if your kid is, and we don't know it, I mean, literally we don't know it. If your kid is waiting for you to go to sleep and then flipping everything back on and playing all night, they have just really destroyed their circadian rhythms, and you're going to see elevated behavior. So those are the big pieces: contract. There's a lot online. And somebody who's phenomenal, a behavioralist in McLean, her name is Sharon Weiss. If you're like, oh my God, I'm at the end of the rope, I highly recommend her. She's brilliant. Sharon Weiss, W-E-I-S-S, and she's a behavioral counselor in McLean, Virginia. I have never had a parent go to her that didn't come out and go, A, how didn't I think of that? And B, oh my God, that made such a change in our relationship.
For both parents.
And yeah, and for both parents. And she's a very straight person. So I have a family who's there now. I'll tell on them because they're not in the room. That the child is incredibly perfectionistic. So is dad. And Sharon, mom, called me up laughing and said, so, I don't know who she was giving us advice on, my daughter or my husband. And he was sitting there. He's an incredibly accomplished businessman here in DC. And she said, he got out and was like, how much did we pay for that? And she said, but we all need to listen because she's taking her lead from you. And so she'll be really straight with you on if she sees things that you as adults need to shore up, along with ways that you can help your child. She gives phenomenal contracts. Sharon Weiss, W-E-I-S-S. Can I go over here first? Okay. We have some good advice on this one.
Well, we both can. So the question was, how do you get your kids to turn the screen time off? The one thing that you reminded me that Sharon said, so Sharon was part of my Verizon network, okay, and I could probably name 6 or 7 other ones, and I've seen this movie before with the 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and on and on. But one thing that Sharon said to me that I really liked was that if you have a contract, then it's not you versus the kid. I'm sorry, this is what we agreed to, this is what the contract says, right? And then she will come up with something, and there are probably, again, things online, because we hate to say you have to go to somebody, but she will come up with something that says, okay, for things that they really want, you get one chit or one coupon for those things every time you do that, and that's really what that says. The other thing that I've learned too is that because kids aren't always great with lists, visual cues. This is what it looks like. What would it look like for you to be ready in the morning, right? Here's a picture of you actually putting something in your backpack and actually having those pictures in a row so that they can visually be prompted, because they may be much more, they may respond much more to that. So one thing that's really changed our lives in our house was having systems. Now we kind of get, the systems only work for so long, of course, if those of you who've had systems, but at least you became the system that was the bad guy instead of Dad or I. And one, I know Kathy wants to say something too. And one other thing I would say, you know, just being very open about this, is back to the whole sitting in Sharon Weiss's office. You know, that's where we learned a lot too, because my husband had, you know, kind of a temper about some of this, and I had my imperfections, of course. And so she really called us out on it. You know, I remember me saying what front time, he just goes in the back seat and he just puts on the headphones and just watch television the whole time, and I feel like I'm his chauffeur. And she said, really, whose car is it? And it's like the silliest question, but it made me think, you know, sometimes I think we as parents feel so out of control. But then all of a sudden we have to feel like we're, you know, kind of given control again. Okay, so we can make the rules and we can set the parameters. Sometimes we're fighting on so many fronts that it just feels like we're out of control. And I think that's where we have to step back and think to ourselves, okay, this is a level of maturity that they're at. And so, you know, we need to kind of take back the rules and set it straight. Sorry.
Let me just finish that one piece, then we'll come to you. And I have a contract and they're not following it. You can point out to them that you do not want to fight with them and you know they're trying. So I don't know how many of you guys remember when they were in preschool, those time timers that you can set, and the red comes because it's so much easier for them to understand that visual that becomes less and less and less by the minute than it is for them to say, you know, what is the next, what I have to watch, and when it hits 1, I guess I'm done because I get 5 minutes. She highly recommends, and we have them in the center, but with a child that she and I are both working with, she recommended to the parents that they get one of those and set it and say, when this runs out and there's no more red, if you want full time tomorrow, you give it to me. If you need more time today, I will take it off of tomorrow for you. And so there's no fight. You're making the decision. You blow it today, I'm taking the time back. And that the kids, you know they want it every day. And you didn't fight with them about, you know, why do I have to ask you all the time? What are we doing? You allow them to make their decision and then live with the consequences.
So with that, we're going to just close with one last comment, which is that why do study skills matter? I feel like it's to this crowd, hopefully this will resonate as a last takeaway piece. You know, when we want our kids to learn a sport, or we want our kids to learn art or something really important to them, what do? We teach them technique. You have to learn, you know, how to dribble and pass and all that. We make them practice. You know, God forbid, you should not miss a practice, right? You have to go to practice. And then whatever they may need help with, whether it's dribbling, passing, shooting, or some certain thing, you know, we get them a coach. We think study skills are really that important, that we really need to make sure that we're teaching them the technique of the planning, organization, you know, and breaking work down, note-taking. We need to make sure they're practicing those specific things. And we have to make sure that whether it's you or an outside person, that there's a coach. And we hope that that's really what we left you with tonight. And we very much, on behalf of Kathy and I, we really want to thank you for your time and thank the lab school for inviting us.